The sun had just risen over the hills when Nia stepped out into the soft breath of morning, her feet bare on the dew-kissed earth. Her hands moved with practiced ease, fetching water, lighting the fire, checking the millet pot. She worked in silence, not because she lacked words, but because silence had long become her language. Kamau stirred inside, coughing lightly, and she smiled to herself, knowing the rhythm of his breath, the weight of his tired steps before they even touched the doorway. They had been married for 4 years, and in that time, Nia had come to understand both the comforts and costs of love. Kamau was gentle with her, never raised his voice, always brought her the choicest yam from the harvest. But his love, though steady, was like a shield held just behind his back, present but never fully offered in front of others. Especially in front of his mother and sisters. Kamau's family was known in the village for their pride. His mother, in particular, believed in strong bloodlines and powerful wives. Nia, with her soft-spoken ways, her dark unpainted skin, and her quiet devotion to the soil, was not what they had prayed for. She heard the words when they thought she wasn't listening. "She's too plain," one sister whispered. "She'll never bear sons strong enough to lead," said another. Kamau could have chosen better. But Nia said nothing. She answered through her actions, through the perfectly thatched roof, the garden that never failed, the children she tutored with patient joy under the mango tree. Kamau would sometimes place a hand on her back at night and say, "Don't listen to them." But even his affection was quiet, always when no one else was watching. That morning, after finishing the washing, Nia set out for the river to gather herbs. She carried a simple woven basket and hummed low, a song her mother used to sing. It was then, at the bend of the old path shaded by baobab trees, that she saw her. An old woman, slumped, wheezing, her walking stick broken beside her. Nia rushed forward without thinking. She knelt beside the elder, gently wiping her brow with the edge of her wrapper. The woman's skin was dry and cracked, her breath shallow. "Water," the woman whispered. Nia gave her from her calabash, then tore some bark from a nearby morina tree, crushing it into a pulp and pressing it gently to the woman's lips. The old woman looked into her eyes, and for a moment her gaze was piercing, strangely bright for someone so close to fainting. "You walk with the wind," the elder murmured. "And the wind remembers those who plant in silence." Nia blinked. "You need rest, Mama. I will take you home." "No," the woman said, gripping her hand. "I will find you again. When it matters most." Before Nia could respond, the old woman drifted into sleep. Nia waited beside her until a passing traveler came by with an ox cart, and together they helped the elder to the healer's hut at the edge of the village. Nia asked for nothing, didn't give her name. She only left a wrapped bundle of roasted nuts for when the woman awoke and returned home as the sun reached its peak. Back at the compound, Kamau was feeding the chickens, his back turned. His mother sat on the veranda shelling beans, eyes sharp. "You're late," she snapped. "I helped a traveler who was ill," Nia said simply. "A good wife sees to her own house first," the woman muttered. Nia gave no reply. She only entered the kitchen and began preparing lunch. Kamau glanced at her as she passed, and for a brief second, something like guilt flickered in his eyes. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. That night, as they lay side by side in the low flickering light, Kamau touched her hand gently. "You're always helping people," he said, almost like an apology. "It's not help," Nia said softly. "It's who I am." Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The moonlight bathed the compound in silver. And somewhere, in a quiet healer's hut on the far edge of the village, the elder woman woke and whispered to the dark, "She doesn't yet know, but the rain will listen to her feet." The grinding stone sounded louder than usual that morning. Kamau sat at the edge of the veranda, sharpening his hoe blade, but his eyes weren't focused. Inside, laughter and low voices floated through the reed walls. His mother and aunt, talking as they had been for days now, always pausing when he walked in, always turning silent smiles toward Nia that carried the weight of unspoken judgment. "She's good with herbs, yes," his aunt said, just loud enough for him to hear. "But what is all that when her womb is still quiet?" Kamau clenched the handle of his blade. "She is too gentle," his mother added. "The kind who folds herself small to avoid breaking. But we need a woman who holds her place with pride, who builds a family name, not just a garden." His aunt agreed, "There's still time to fix this. That girl from Mweru, what's her name?" "Malika. Her family owns cattle. And she's fierce." Kamau stood abruptly, making the blade clatter to the ground. The voices paused, then shifted into the soft clinks of beads being packed, the rustle of wrappers. He walked to the back of the compound where Nia was feeding the chickens. She looked up, her face calm, and offered a soft smile. He managed a nod, but it hung crooked in the air. "Will you be coming with me to the western plot tomorrow?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, already turning away. Inside, the whispers resumed. Lower now but still sharp. That evening, Kamau's mother called him into the main hut. She didn't sit, didn't offer food or tea. "We gave you time," she said. "But you have only grown more passive. You are the eldest son of a strong line. We cannot allow silence and soft steps to swallow your future." He opened his mouth to speak, but his aunt raised her hand. "It is not disobedience," she said. "It is tradition. A second wife will strengthen the house, the bloodline. Malika is not just beautiful, she is respected, and her father has lands." Kamau lowered his gaze. His heartbeat slowed painfully. "I love Nia," he said quietly. "She's not enough," his mother replied without hesitation. "And love won't plant legacy." The words sat in the air like thorns. That night, Nia prepared his favorite meal: spiced groundnuts and roast yams, stewed greens with a hint of lemon leaf. She laid the mat near the fire and called him softly. He came, hesitant, and sat across from her. She served him, poured water, said nothing about the weight in his shoulders. Halfway through the meal she spoke. "Will I still be allowed to plant the millet this season?" The question was gentle, almost casual, but it struck Kamau like thunder. He swallowed hard and looked down at the bowl. The scent of groundnut now made his stomach turn. I don't know what to say," he murmured. She didn't press. She nodded once and stood to gather the empty calabashes. Her steps were steady, her back unbent. Kamau wanted to speak, wanted to explain that he hadn't agreed yet, that he still hadn't made a final decision, that everything was moving too fast. But the words wouldn't come. His throat stayed dry, his chest heavy. He watched her disappear into the shadows of the kitchen, the sound of rinsing echoing softly. The next morning, Nia rose early as always, her hands moving through morning chores like water flowing around stone. She didn't cry, didn't hesitate. She fed the chickens, swept the yard, folded Kamau's wrapper. Kamau's mother, meanwhile, dressed in her finest beads and sent 2 boys to the neighboring village with a message of intent. They carried with them palm wine, a cloth parcel of ground turmeric, and a bracelet from Kamau's grandmother. The match had been set in motion. Kamau stood beneath the mango tree, hands buried in his pockets, watching the dust trail fade behind the messengers. Behind him, Nia watered the garden. She hummed softly, the same lullaby she always did. But for the first time the garden felt too quiet, and the song felt like goodbye. The drums started at first light, low and rhythmic, pulsing through the air like a storm approaching. Dust curled in the distance as the wedding procession neared, bright cloths, singing women, baskets of fruit and palm wine balanced on proud heads. The village gathered along the path, eyes wide, necks craning. Malika arrived on a litter of carved wood carried by 4 young men. She wore crimson and gold, her hair coiled in elaborate twists. Gold bracelets lined both arms, clinking as she waved like royalty. Her skin glowed in the sun, and her eyes, sharp, calculating, bold, swept the village like a queen surveying her new kingdom. Kamau stood nervously at the edge of the compound, sweat on his brow despite the breeze. His mother, however, glowed with pride, standing tall beside him, adjusting her head wrap for the 3rd time. "Now that is a wife," she whispered. "A woman who walks like she belongs beside a leader." Nia watched from the side, hands folded. She wore her oldest wrapper, faded blue, patterned with tiny birds, and her hair was tied back simply. She hadn't been asked to stand beside Kamau, nor to greet the bride. Her presence wasn't needed, but her labor was. She had prepared the yams, roasted the chicken, swept the compound, and now she moved silently among the guests, pouring tea and offering plates with bowed head. When Malika descended from the litter, she turned to Kamau and smiled broadly. He returned it faintly, eyes flickering past her to where Nia poured tea into calabashes on the far bench. Malika followed his gaze and stiffened slightly, but she said nothing at first. The feast was grand, music, dancing, jokes, praise names shouted into the dusk. The crowd chattered endlessly. "She's from the Mweru family? She studied with healers. They say she speaks 3 tongues. Even the chief's son made an appearance, nodding in approval. As darkness settled, lamps were lit, and Nia moved quietly among the revelers, collecting empty dishes, pouring hot tea into waiting hands. It was then that Malika, seated proudly in the center of the main mat, caught her eye and called out. "You there, first wife?" she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you understand your place now." A hush fell around the fire. Kamau shifted but said nothing. Nia stepped forward, her back straight. She placed a fresh calabash of tea beside Malika's elbow and met her gaze, not challengingly but fully. "I always have," she replied, her voice soft and even. Malika blinked, surprised at the steadiness in her tone. Nia turned without another word and moved back into the shadows, where her presence was small but her work continued. She refilled a pot, mended a basket, handed a crying child a piece of roasted yam. The music resumed, laughter returning like cautious birds. Kamau stood as if rooted, caught between two worlds, the bright fire and the calm dusk. Later that night, after the last dance ended and the guests had returned to their huts, Nia folded the last of the mats and swept the ash from under the cooking stones. Malika slept in Kamau's hut, her bracelets clinking faintly with every breath. Nia lay alone under her mosquito net, hands folded on her stomach, eyes open to the roof. She had always known her place. But what no one understood, not even Kamau, was that her place was not beside a man, nor beneath a new wife's stare. It was in the quiet soil she tended, in the warmth of the tea she poured, in the roots that listened long before the rain came. The garden behind the hut had always been a place of small, quiet life. Nia had once planted it with joy, okra, basil, aloe, lemongrass, and though the seasons had changed, the soil still remembered her touch. Now, she returned to it not with joy, but with the weight of silence she no longer wished to carry inside her chest. She picked up the broken-handled hoe, pulled her wrapper tight and began again. Each morning before the sun rose high, she loosened the ground, pruned the herbs, watered the struggling plants. Her fingers were often stained green, her arms sore, her back damp with effort, but her breath stayed steady, her eyes calm. What she did not say in the house, she spoke to the leaves. Within days, life began to answer her. The moringa sprouted fresh tips. The old aloe thickened. And one day, as she clipped bitter leaf branches to dry for tea, a boy wandered into the garden holding his belly. "My stomach hurts, Auntie," he said, his eyes dull with pain. She asked him what he ate. He mentioned river fish. She knelt, gently touched his pulse, then went into her small storage hut and returned with crushed guava leaves and a spoonful of charcoal. She made him sit in the shade, mixed a paste with water, and fed him herself. The boy returned the next day, smiling. His mother came behind him, her hands wringing with gratitude. He slept like a rock. No crying. No fever. "Thank you." Nia only smiled and handed her a sachet of dried pawpaw seeds for the future. Word began to spread quietly like roots beneath the earth. One woman came for help with her child's cough. Another for skin rashes. Another for swelling in her legs. Nia never charged, never boasted. She simply listened, gathered herbs, and gave what was needed. "She saved my baby," one mother whispered at the well. Meanwhile, inside the compound, Malika was beginning to realize that village life did not suit her like the golden bracelets had promised. She struggled with carrying water in the mornings, her back aching, wrists bruised. She did not know the timing of firewood or how to heat water without smoke stinging her eyes. Her long nails broke. Her wrapper tore. She missed meat and thick soups and the things servants used to do for her in her father's house. At first she blamed Nia. "She made all this look so easy," she muttered. But then she began to blame Kamau. "You said I'd have a house," she said one evening, standing at the doorway with her hands on her hips. "I want my own kitchen. My own roof. This was not the life I was promised." Kamau rubbed his temples. "We agreed you'd stay here first. Until we build." "I did not agree. I was told. I left my family for you, and now I share a hearth with a woman who stares at the ground." "She doesn't stare at the ground. She works it," Kamau said before he could stop himself. Malika's eyes flashed. Kamau stood, pushed past her and walked outside. The moon was high, the night cool. He wandered without thinking, until he found himself at the back of the compound, at the edge of Nia's garden. She was there, kneeling with a lantern beside her. She was mixing something in a small calabash, whispering to herself as she worked. He stood quietly watching. She looked up once, nodded slightly, then returned to her work. He sat on a rock nearby. "You're still healing people," he said. "If they come, I help," she replied simply. "You always did." Nia didn't answer. Kamau ran a hand through his hair. "She's struggling." "I know. I thought marrying her would fix things. I thought she was strong." "She is," Nia said gently. "But strength needs time. Soil doesn't obey a shouting hand." Kamau exhaled slowly. "You never said a word when she insulted you." "I said what needed saying," Nia replied. "The rest, I let the ground answer." Kamau looked around the garden. It was thriving more than any other patch he'd seen. The air smelled of mint and wet roots. Fireflies blinked above the lemongrass. It was peaceful in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. "I miss this place," he said. "You still live here?" "No," he said, his voice almost breaking. "I only sleep here now." Nia looked at him then, her eyes unreadable. She didn't speak. She simply reached for another handful of neem and continued grinding. Kamau sat beside her in silence, listening to the soft scrape of stone against leaves. He realized then that peace wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with gold or feasts. It crept up gently like roots. It lived in quiet hands, steady breath, and a woman who knew how to heal things without needing to own them. And it had always been here, just behind the hut. The morning began with shouting. Kamau had barely stretched from his sleep when Malika stormed out of the hut, waving a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Her eyes were wild, her voice pitched high enough to rattle the birds from the trees. "She hides things beneath your pillow. Do you think this is love? These are spells, charms." Kamau rubbed his eyes. "Malika, what are you talking about?" "This," she shouted, unwrapping the bundle in front of him. Inside were crushed leaves, a pinch of powdered root, and a sprig of mint, dry, harmless, familiar. "She put this under your head." Kamau blinked, recognizing the mixture. Nia had quietly placed it under his pillow 3 nights ago, when his back had ached so badly he couldn't stand straight. She hadn't said a word about it, only offered him a warm compress in her quiet presence. "It's for pain," he murmured. "Oh, is that what she told you?" Malika snapped. "Do you even know what these plants do? Or are you too lost in her garden spell to see it clearly?" By now, Kamau's mother had emerged from the main hut, lips pursed and arms crossed. She took one look at the scattered herbs and turned coldly toward her son. "This is why you're weak," she said. "Why nothing in this house is as it should be. She's been working something on all of us. I should have known. Always too quiet, too polite. That's how they hide danger." Kamau's protest faltered under the weight of her glare. "You think peace comes from silence?" his mother continued. "No. Real women don't slither in the shadows. They stand in the open. She's poisoning you, Kamau." The word struck the compound like thunder. Poisoning. Neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the noise. Eyes turned toward Nia's corner, toward the back garden where she was washing roots for a fevered child. She heard the word, witchcraft, float through the air and knew even before anyone called her that the time had come. She wiped her hands, tied her wrapper tightly, and walked calmly to the front of the compound where the voices had risen. Malika pointed at her with trembling fingers. "Admit it. You've been working magic, turning my husband's heart, turning the village against me." Nia met her gaze. "I use herbs. For healing." "Then why hide them?" "They were under his pillow," Nia said gently. "Not yours." The elder mother stepped forward. "You think you are above tradition? That you can use forest tricks to replace your place in this home?" Nia looked at Kamau. He said nothing. His mouth was open but no sound came. So she lowered her eyes and nodded once. "If my presence brings more fear than peace, I will go. I will not tear this house apart." The murmurs turned to gasps. "You're admitting guilt," Kamau's mother snapped. "I'm admitting weariness," Nia said. "And a desire not to be the fire that burns a home I once watered." She turned, quietly entered her room and began to pack. A cloth bundle. Her knife. A small calabash of oil. The amulet her mother had given her. She moved slowly, with purpose, folding her few belongings with the same care she gave to her garden. The air outside was thick with tension. Kamau sat on a stool, holding his head. Malika stood tall, victorious, though her hands trembled at her sides. But before Nia could tie her bundle shut, a shadow fell over the doorway. An old voice called out, "Stop her." All heads turned. Standing at the entrance to the compound was the sick elder woman from months before, the one Nia had helped on the roadside. But now she was upright, strong, dressed in deep red cloth with beads around her wrists. Behind her stood 2 tall men, her sons, with staffs in their hands and leather belts heavy with charms. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "It's Mombeki," someone whispered. "The seer of the southern path." Mombeki stepped into the yard as if she'd never been ill. Her eyes, bright and sharp, landed on Nia. Then on the herbs still clutched in Malika's hand. "Put those down, child," she said. "You don't know what power you play with." Malika hesitated, then dropped them. Mombeki looked at the chief's guard, who had arrived moments before, called by Kamau's mother in anticipation of judgment. The guard glanced toward the crowd, unsure. Mambeki turned to the chief himself, who had followed quietly, curious about the commotion. "Chief Tendo," she said calmly, "you are about to exile a woman who healed my bones when I could not walk. Who gave without knowing my name, who asked for nothing, who sang the old prayers to the leaves while her own heart cracked." The chief blinked, stunned. "You know her?" "She saved my life," Mambeki said. "And she is no ordinary healer. She is a vessel, carrying the kind of blessing we no longer recognize because we've grown too fond of noise." She turned to Kamau. "Did you not feel your bones strengthen after she touched them with paste?" He nodded slowly. "To the mother," Mambeki said, "your son was loved by a woman who could have cursed you, but instead made you medicine. And to the second wife, be careful. Your fire may one day burn your own feet." The compound was silent now. Even the wind had stilled. Mambeki turned to Nia. "You will not go. Not until the land speaks." The chief raised a hand. "Let her stay. No judgment until truth reveals itself fully." Kamau looked up at Nia, shame tightening his face. But she didn't look back at him. Her eyes were on Mambeki. The old woman smiled. "Blessings don't always come with music. Some arrive carrying baskets, not spears." And Nia, without a word, untied her bundle, returned her calabash to the shelf, and went back to tending her herbs. The rains never came. What began as a delayed season quickly turned into whispers of a curse. The clouds stayed thin and distant, the sun more brutal than ever. The rivers shrank, wells ran low, and cracks split the earth like angry scars. Children walked further for water. Goats grew gaunt. The compound's maize field withered under the unrelenting heat. Even the proud elders grew silent. Malika woke one morning to find the hens dead and her yams shriveled into dust. She threw her clay pot down in frustration, letting it shatter across the stone. "This place is cursed," she cried. Kamau, sitting at the edge of the compound with a machete he hadn't sharpened in days, said nothing. His clothes hung looser now. His eyes stayed low. Each day he seemed to shrink more into himself, like a shadow of the man Nia had once known. Malika stormed into the house and confronted his mother. "I want my dowry returned," she snapped. "You promised a husband with wealth and land. This is death, not marriage." Kamau's mother, once so proud, now bent with pain in her knees and fatigue in her voice, tried to calm her. "It is not his fault. The drought affects all. Then let all return what they cannot uphold," Malika hissed before leaving to sit alone under the tree. But all were not suffering the same. Behind the hut, in the quiet patch of land where Nia worked, green still grew. The millet stood tall. Her lemongrass and morina were lush. Even her creeping herbs flourished. No one could understand it. They began to come one by one. First, a young mother who had heard Nia's tea could ease a baby's fever. Then a boy with sunburn on his back. Then a man with a twisted ankle from chasing goats over dry stone. And then, silently, her mother-in-law. It was late afternoon when Nia looked up from stirring her herbal water to find the older woman standing just outside the garden. She held herself with that same old pride, but her fingers shook from stiffness. Nia didn't speak. She only moved aside, gesturing to the woven stool. Kamau's mother hesitated, then sat slowly. "I have pain," she muttered, not meeting Nia's eyes. "In my joints. I can barely move at night." Nia rinsed her hands, selected a few soaked herbs from her basin, and set a pot to warm. She moved without judgment, her breath steady, her touch careful. "You should drink this each morning before the sun rises," she said. "And wrap warm cloths around your knees." The older woman nodded, voice tight. "I will pay." "There's no need." She looked up, startled. "I do not poison what I was once told to honor," Nia said simply. "Pain is pain." The elders sat back, the steam from the herbs rising between them like a mist over old wounds. Later that week, the village chief himself visited the edge of Nia's plot. He did not speak grandly, he only asked how her field still flourished. She told him, "I wake with the earth. I do not ask it to hurry. I feed the soil even when it gives nothing back. And I pray, not for plenty but for patience." He nodded slowly and left with a small packet of leaves for his coughing wife. By the time a month had passed, it was known across the village. Nia's ground listens. People brought small gifts in exchange for advice. Eggs, beads, a carved spoon, dried cassava. Nia took none of it with pride, only with humility. And she gave freely when she sensed it was needed. Kamau began to linger nearby more often. He would stand near the back of the hut and watch as she worked, not speaking. Sometimes he'd fetch water for her without being asked. Sometimes he just sat in the shade, saying nothing. He seemed thinner, quieter. But his eyes followed her hands with something like memory, of things he once valued and didn't understand until they had faded from his reach. Malika noticed. She watched from the kitchen doorway as villagers left with bundles from Nia's hands and gratitude on their faces. Her lips tightened. Her frustration grew. Her fingers ached from carrying water that never lasted. Her pride no longer fed her. That night, Kamau sat near the cooking stones, staring at the millet porridge in his bowl. "She was not what I expected," he said softly, almost to himself. Malika didn't answer. Her gold bracelets were dull with dust. Her anger no longer had words. Only silence. And in the far corner of the compound, Nia knelt by her plants, humming under her breath. Her hands were stained with the color of healing, and her garden rustled gently in the windless night. The drought was still upon them. But somehow where Nia's fingers touched, life kept growing. The sky had stayed bone-dry for weeks, cracked open with heat, refusing to whisper even a promise of rain. The fields lay bare, the paths dusty and hot under bare feet. Each day Nia watched the horizon and listened, not just with ears but with the kind of stillness that held space for signs. That night she dreamed again. She was walking the narrow footpath behind her millet plot, the world hushed around her, the trees frozen like watchers. In the center of the path stood the old woman, Mumbeki, the one she'd helped months ago, now strong and bright-eyed. But in the dream, the seer was even more radiant, cloaked in a robe of mist and light. Her voice echoed in the air like thunder behind mountains. "What you plant in silence," she said, "will one day roar louder than fire. The earth is listening." Nia opened her mouth to speak, but her feet sank into soft mud, the path turning suddenly to fertile ground. When she woke, the wind had shifted. The air no longer pressed down with that dry, angry weight. Instead, it carried the faint scent of movement, like something waiting just beyond the sky. Nia sat up and lit a small clay lamp. Her hands moved without hesitation, reaching for the old calabash wrapped in cloth under her bed. Inside were fragments from her grandmother's rain-offering ritual, ashes from burnt herbs, a string of river beads, dried hibiscus petals, and a piece of broken pottery that once held ancestral water. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her heart as clearly as if she had spoken aloud. "Rain answers what is planted with belief." At dawn, Nia called gently to the children who often lingered near her garden. "Can you help me gather leaves?" she asked. Without questions they scattered, returning with neem, fig and cassava leaves. One girl offered a feather. A boy brought smooth stones from the well. Nia smiled and accepted everything. She dug a small pit under the neem tree where she always worked, encircled it with the stones and sprinkled the ash and leaves inside. With a calabash of sacred water saved from the last rains, she washed her hands, then poured the remainder slowly into the pit. She knelt and whispered, not words of pleading but thanks. Thanks for the growth she had witnessed. For the healing she'd given. For patience that still held its shape in her chest. Then she sang. It was an old melody, one her grandmother had sung during famine when Nia was a girl. It didn't beg the sky, it reminded it. "I do not command. I remember. I remember you once fed us. I remember you danced with us. Come if you remember me too." She sang until her voice cracked, until the sun dipped low and the leaves no longer swayed. Then she covered the pit with soil, stood up, and went inside without a word. That night, thunder cracked like a drum over the hill. Lightning flashed once. Twice. Then the rain came. Heavy. Sure. So sudden it woke half the village from their beds. Children ran outside squealing. Pots were placed under roofs to catch it. Old men lifted their faces and wept without shame. Women clapped and ululated, dancing in the yards. In the middle of the compound, Kamau stood barefoot in the wet dust, drenched and speechless. Water soaked his shirt, his face, his hair, but he didn't move. His eyes were on Nia. She had stepped out under the eaves, a shawl over her shoulders, her expression calm, almost reverent. She didn't dance. Didn't shout. She only looked up once and whispered something to the sky. Kamau took a slow step toward her but stopped halfway. He saw it all now, the garden that had never died, the children who trusted her, the elders who came to her, and now, the rain. It wasn't coincidence. It was blessing. A blessing he had once held and walked past. Nia turned, locking eyes with him for the briefest moment. There was no anger in her gaze. Only quiet knowing. The kind that lived in roots. The kind that roared without needing to raise its voice. The rain had come, but Malika felt no relief. While the village celebrated fresh water and green shoots, she sat alone inside the hut, staring at the mud floor, her hands clenched into fists. She had lost count of the times Kamau had walked past her without a word, or how many times villagers ignored her greeting. Even Kamau's mother, once her strongest ally, had grown quiet, limping each morning to Nia's corner for tea and balm, never once inviting Malika along. Nothing belonged to her. Not the kitchen. Not Kamau's time. Not even her own reputation. "I want to go home," she whispered one morning as she packed her wrapper and comb into a cloth bag. Kamau didn't stop her. His only reply was a tired sigh as he repaired the chicken pen outside. She left at sunrise, head held high despite her shaking knees. The road was muddy, and her shoes sank with every step. By noon she reached the next village where her uncle lived. She knocked on his door with trembling fingers. His wife opened the door, took one look at her and frowned. "So now you come? My marriage. We warned you about rushing." "I thought." "You thought you'd be a queen," her aunt interrupted. "And now you're just a woman with nowhere to go." They did not let her inside. By nightfall she sat shivering under a tree near the market square. Her lips were dry. Her bag soaked. Her pride, now limp and tattered, could no longer keep her warm. 2 days later she stumbled back into Kamau's compound, thinner, coughing and burning with fever. Kamau barely looked up. "She sleeps behind the hut," he muttered. They all knew who he meant. Malika dragged her aching body to Nia's corner and collapsed near the cooking stones. When Nia came out of her hut carrying a basket of herbs, she stopped, looked at the shivering woman curled on the ground and said nothing. She set the basket down, fetched a cloth and knelt beside Malika. "I'm burning," Malika croaked. "You walked too far. And your pride let you go without water," Nia replied softly. Malika coughed, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" Nia dipped a cloth in cool water and placed it on Malika's forehead. Her touch was steady, her face unreadable. "Because I know how it feels," she said, "to be unwanted." Malika closed her eyes. The words pierced more than the fever. That night, Malika drifted in and out of sleep, waking only to sips of lemongrass tea or soft humming from Nia's mat nearby. Not once did Nia raise her voice. Not once did she say, "I told you so." She only sat near like a silent fire warming cold bones. On the third day Malika's fever broke. She woke to the smell of boiled rice and the sight of Nia crouching at the edge of the garden, crushing leaves into a paste. "I tried to ruin you," Malika whispered, her voice raw. "And still you fed me." Nia didn't look up. "I didn't feed you. I fed the part of you still hungry for peace." Malika began to cry, not the quiet sobs of shame, but the guttural mourning of someone realizing what they had lost by chasing things they never understood. "I'm sorry," she said through tears. "For everything." Nia came over, wiped her cheeks with the edge of her shawl and simply said, "Then begin again." Later that week Malika asked to learn about herbs. Nia raised an eyebrow. "You want to work?" "I want to understand." So Nia handed her a bundle of lemongrass. "Boil this. Not too long. Let it speak first." Day by day Nia taught her to listen, to roots, to soil, to silence. She corrected her gently, never cruelly. Malika fumbled but never gave up. The villagers noticed. Some nodded cautiously. A few smiled. One afternoon, Malika brought a child with sun rash to Nia's hut. She sat by her side as they made ointment together. The child laughed when Malika smeared too much. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was something. Kamau watched from afar as the two women worked together. He didn't understand it, this quiet bond built from wounds and forgiveness. He had once imagined rivalry. He now saw something closer to resilience. And when he passed by one morning and heard them laughing softly over a pile of dried mint leaves, he felt smaller somehow. Like a man standing at the edge of a garden he had once owned but never cultivated. The home had found peace, not from his leadership, not from possession, but from the strength of two women who had lost everything, and found something gentler in each other. The morning was clear, the sky washed clean by the recent rains. The compound buzzed with quiet activity, children chasing chickens, women scrubbing pots, smoke curling from cooking fires. It was the kind of morning that looked ordinary. But it wasn't. Kamau stood near the center of the courtyard, shoulders square, eyes steady. He had been silent too long, watching the home change without lifting his voice, letting choices be made around him. But silence, he had learned, was its own kind of cowardice. He cleared his throat. His mother looked up from slicing cassava. His brothers paused from tending the goats. Malika stepped from the side of the hut, a pail in her hands. And Nia, kneeling beside her herbs, stopped, lifted her head and waited. "I have something to say," Kamau announced, loud enough that even the neighbors tending nearby fields turned to listen. A slow hush fell. "I have been quiet," he began, "longer than I should have. I thought my silence kept peace. But it only fed the wrong kind of fire." He glanced at Nia. Her face was calm, unreadable. He continued, voice stronger now. "When the drought came, it was Nia's hands that fed us. When sickness crept into this compound, it was her herbs that healed us. When everything fell apart, it was her who held it together, not with shouting, not with power, but with patience and love." Kamau's mother stiffened. "Are you scolding your own blood?" "I am holding myself accountable first," he said. "I watched this home dishonor her. I let you speak of her as if she were furniture, not a person. I let her carry shame she never deserved. And I'm done being that kind of man." The silence deepened. No one moved. "I will no longer stand for any decision that leaves Nia behind. She is the reason this family still eats, still breathes, still has any dignity at all." From the back of the compound, a creaking voice rose. "I agree." All eyes turned to the old man sitting on the stool near the fire, Kamau's father. He rarely spoke, preferring to grunt or nod through family discussions. But now his voice rang out clear. "We forced a choice," he said slowly. "We saw a quiet woman and thought she was weak. We wanted gold and we forgot the value of water. We nearly lost the blessing we already had." His words, like seeds dropped in dry soil, sank deep. Kamau stepped forward, past his stunned mother, past Malika who stood with her head bowed, and stopped before Nia. She had risen to her feet but hadn't taken a step. He looked her in the eyes, not with the weight of marriage, but with the honesty of a man stripped of excuse. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not as your husband. As a man. For not seeing you when you were giving everything. For making you prove your worth when you already lived it. You owe me nothing, but I owe you truth." Nia didn't speak right away. The breeze tugged lightly at her shawl. Her hands were still stained from the herbs she had been grinding. She studied him for a long moment. And then she simply nodded. Forgiveness was not granted in a grand speech. It was not shouted or dramatized. It was a seed, offered without flourish, with no promise but quiet potential. Behind her, Malika exhaled slowly and walked back to her chores. Kamau's mother, stiff and uncertain, sat down beside her cooking pot and did not meet anyone's eyes. And Kamau turned and joined Nia in the garden, not as a husband reclaiming authority, but as a man finally learning how to kneel beside someone who had always deserved his voice. The sun rose gently over the hills, brushing the earth with gold as morning smoke curled from the huts like prayers. The village had changed, but not in loud, sudden ways. It had changed in the quiet way water softens stone, the way roots crack walls over time, the way healing seeps in before anyone realizes it's arrived. A year had passed since the rain returned, and with it, something else, a sense of steadiness, of rhythm. Where once there was only Nia's small patch of herbs behind the compound, there now stood a wide-open healing center built from woven grass, clay walls, and love. Women came daily to learn, not only how to crush leaves into balm, but how to stand taller, speak with care, listen like earth, and protect each other. It wasn't called a school, but it felt like one. Children ran barefoot through rows of millet and beans, singing songs about strong hands and gentle hearts. The villagers called it Nia's field. The chief himself had carved her name into a wooden sign placed at the entrance. Inside the garden compound, long benches were arranged in circles where women of all ages ground seeds, wrapped herbs, stitched together pouches of dried root powder, and shared stories, some soft, some broken, all brave. At the center of it all was Nia. She moved with the same quiet purpose, but now her silence held weight, like shade after sun, like rain after drought. Her hair, tied back with a deep blue scarf, shimmered with streaks of silver. Children followed her, giggling, calling her Teacher Nia, with sticky fingers and bright eyes. Malika was always near. Her hands, once too smooth for work, now bore small scars and calluses. She tied bundles, offered comfort, learned plant names. She no longer rushed to speak, but when she did, her voice was measured and warm. To anyone visiting from another village, one would never guess she was once the second wife who nearly tore a family apart. Now she stood beside Nia, not as a servant or a shadow, but as someone reborn in purpose. Every week, Kamau worked the outer field, a quiet, humbler man who no longer claimed things but offered himself to them. He turned soil, gathered compost, built fences for the new beekeeping patch. He never walked ahead of Nia now, always beside or behind, waiting for instruction, sometimes pausing just to watch her hands move over leaves. He never asked to be called husband again. But in his silence there was respect. One afternoon, the village held a harvest celebration. Children wore crowns made of grass. Women brought cassava stew and roasted maize. Music floated from thumb pianos and calabash drums. Laughter and dancing filled the yard, echoing across the hills. The women of the village had painted the walls of the center with scenes from their stories. One depicted Nia kneeling in a garden, her hands reaching into dry earth as a single flower bloomed beside her. Near the fire pit, a girl with missing front teeth tugged on Nia's shawl. "Teacher Nia," she said, "why didn't you leave when they were mean to you?" The music faded for a heartbeat. Nia knelt down to the child's eye level, smoothing the girl's frizzy hair. Her gaze didn't falter. "Because sometimes," she said, "the roots we plant in pain bloom into peace. And peace is the harvest I wanted." The child wrinkled her nose. "You mean like spinach?" Nia laughed, her whole body softening. "Exactly like spinach." Laughter rippled through the crowd. As the sky deepened into a soft orange, the chief approached the center circle with a woven basket in his hands. He raised it high. "In honor of the land that refused to die," he declared, "and the woman who taught it to live, this field is yours forever. Let it feed generations not just with food but with the spirit that grew it." Cheers erupted. Nia bowed her head. Malika brought forward a small bowl filled with seeds, millet, cowpea, morina, hibiscus. She handed it to Nia without a word. Nia stepped forward to the garden's edge, knelt slowly and pressed one seed into the earth. Then another. And another. Behind her the other women knelt too, elders, mothers, widows, former rivals. All pressing seeds into the dirt as dusk wrapped them in golden shadow. It was not a ceremony of noise but of intention. Hands worked the soil quietly. The same way Nia had, that first night she slept alone behind the hut, planting something that no one else could see yet. Back then the world had mocked her. Now it followed her lead. The fire burned low. The children settled into laps. Kamau stood at a respectful distance, head bowed. And Nia, standing now, soil clinging to her fingertips, looked at the field she had helped grow, from hunger, from pain, from betrayal. She smiled, not the smile of victory but of understanding. Because she knew, what they planted today was not just food. It was proof that peace, once rooted in truth, does not bend to storms. It answers only to the sky.